Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sándor Isik, a lawyer and editor of a Minus School Facebook page, and I will moderate this next panel. In the previous panel we had lively discussion about the nature of immigration. In this next one we will discuss whether countries or states need to have a strategy about immigration, or should I say migration in general, how migration fits in a state's or nation's economic and political strategy. The panelists of this discussion is Professor Brian Kaplan, who I think I've already introduced, András Kovács, Director of Menedék Egyesület in Hungary, Mikolaj Pisarski, President of the Mises Institute of Economic Education in Wrocław, and Martin Panek, Director, Liberal Institute in Prague. I think everyone was introduced. Oh yeah, I was also introduced. First, I think we should draw a baseline for this discussion. I think we can agree that somehow migration or immigration should be included in nation-level strategies. I would like to ask you guys, Professor Kaplan in general, about what are the main elements of such a strategy should include, and our other panelists, whether they see any specialities for Eastern European countries, because our panel luckily includes like the frontier states of Eastern and Southeastern immigration to Europe. What are some local specialties in these strategies, and what should be the general outline of such a strategy for a state or a nation?
Right. It's tempting to say that I'm actually against having a strategy, but I will say freedom is a strategy. Freedom is a strategy. Saying we have a free trade plan for the development of Hong Kong or Singapore, that's a strategy. It is a modest strategy in one sense, because you are saying the role for government is to get out of the way. The role of the government is to admit that we don't have a useful thing to do here, and we are just going to try to repeal laws that are here, let it be known this is our plan, reassure people that we're not going to change our minds. But of course, on the other hand, it is very ambitious because we are so far away from having anything close to free migration. So the strategy of saying, look, we want to have free trade in labor the way that we have free trade in goods. Of course, we are much closer to free trade in goods than free trade in labor. There are some countries that are very close to free trade in goods. Within the European Union, you already have free trade in goods within Union members. You also now, I think actually all EU members now do have free trade in labor with each other, right?
Yes.
So there's no longer any exceptions, right? So that is a strategy. It doesn't sound like a strategy to many people because it just means you're getting government getting out of the way, but at the same time it is one with a strong rationale, which is this is actually a good thing. The whole point of government regulation is to stop this good thing, and our goal is to stop stopping a good thing. So that's where I would think of it.
All right. Yeah. Thanks. And actually, thanks for saying this, because I mean, at least for me, it can be a good starting point. So let's assume that that's the strategy, and then I think the next question is where are we in that global competition for free trade and especially for free labor? So I mean, if we stick to migration, so let's put trade aside and let's talk about the movement of labor and the free movement of labor. And I think this is the issue where actually the geographic or the geopolitical position comes into the picture, and we need to think. I mean, if a certain country, for instance, as you, Sándor, said, that we are at the eastern frontiers or borders of this region of free trade, so how does it look like in practice? And what you see here in Europe or this part of the world is is a more or less general flow of labor and flow of migration. Obviously, there are exceptions. There are particular patterns which not really fit into this picture. But in the mainstream and mostly, you can say that there is a movement of labor from the east towards the west, or from the south towards the north. This is Europe. This is the European economic space, political space, whatever. And then what happens if you all of a sudden you draw a border on the eastern frontier of this? And then you say that, for instance, in case of Hungary, west of Hungary, there is a space of free movement and free labor. East of Hungary, there are restrictions imposed by the very same political and geopolitical entity. Of course, I mean, that would support your eventual argument that just expanded globally and everything would be fine. So that's actually one particular strategy these countries in the East should or could follow to kind of push it or expand it as much as can. You already see examples, for instance, all the exceptions, the fast-track policies towards, for instance, Ukrainian or Serbian non-EU labor force in the country. But in practice, what you get, at least in case of Hungary, but Poland is not much of a difference, and not talking about Romania or Bulgaria, that there is a huge emigration, a huge labor emigration from these countries. I mean, the estimation in case of Hungary is around 500,000 people who are actually no longer in the country, born in Hungary, but live and work mostly in Western Europe, some of them in the States. And, quote unquote, in return, there is an immigration of roughly the same amount, but a little bit less, from the neighboring countries. And this is where the actual game starts, that if you look closer into the actual social, demographic, economic, education composition of the two populations, then what you see that Hungary is not gaining overall from immigration. I mean, gaining from immigration, but there is much greater loss due to immigration. So one of the strategic goals could or should be to somehow balance it out. And this is the question. I mean, let's stick to the question and just in the first round. So this is one problem the country should solve, like getting a better position in this global. Well, I would say use the word competition.
So first and foremost, Barbara told me that most of you are either directly or indirectly involved with the humanitarian effort helping our brothers and sisters crossing from the Ukraine. So first thing, I wanted to thank you for this, because for the past few weeks it was something exceptional happening. Poland today marks the day that 2 million persons crossed into our country, and they will be allowed to stay at least 18 months in Poland. So we've basically overnight became a humanitarian superpower. We've already accepted 5% of our original population. And does government have a role to play into this? I wanted to second Brian's position, and I say no, because all this effort, all these people who came into Poland, found accommodation in private houses, in housing provided by the private companies, it was all done almost without any kind of government involvement. And where the government was involved, it actually complicated things and made them all a virtual mess. And I wanted to share a little example from the city of Wrocław, where the institute is based. Because Wrocław already had a major Ukrainian community before it all started. The immigration to Poland was already quite large before the war. And it was one of the main destinations. Many people came to the train station and, well, they needed help. So the volunteers showed up, they started to organize things. First one NGO, but it was just a front. You basically were signing a paper and then you were left on your own. They told you, go and help them. Then the second one came. They ran an audit of this and they found out that the whole thing is too much. The government, either local or the central, was nowhere to be found. They concluded that it's too much for them to handle as an NGO. So what they did, they reached out to one of the large international companies. And the company did something remarkable, because the official way would take too long. You would have to get involved in the legal disputes, all and all. So what they did, they've given a free vacation to one of their top managers to go there, figure things out, and organize help. So the completely grassroots local kind of government, volunteer government of this refugee relief action was formed on this central station, still without any help of the government. The rotation of volunteers is high. I believe this is your experience here as well. So what was needed? There needed to be the introduction of procedures was needed. So they've started to write down simple things, how to train new volunteer, how to help these people, the basic words that are needed. All this stuff was produced in a matter of days, and it's been working flawlessly so far. Then, finally, last week, the government officials, both local and central, showed up, and they were completely clueless. They've set up a kitchen there. No one needed this. They were already greeted with warm meals at the border, and they had resources to provide for themselves. But now they want to take over all this effort. They want to throw out the NGOs. They want to throw out these people and take over these procedures already introduced, all these documents that are produced. So maybe, just maybe, let's not have government involved if all it wants to do is to take over the effort that was already organized, and later, when it all will be over, they will say, look how much we did to help. And this is a beautiful case of something that a Nobel Prize winner from 1974, Friedrich August von Hayek, describes as a spontaneous order. I believe that what we need now to tackle this extraordinary crisis is this spontaneous order, because the knowledge, this decentralized knowledge, how to help these people and how to do it fast and efficiently is there on the ground, on the border, on the train stations, in the refugee centers. And to transfer it all and accumulate it on a government centralized level will just take too much. And this is one of the reasons that you don't see any kind of refugee camps now in Poland, because all of this effort was done privately, locally, from the grassroots level. The government simply didn't have time and resources to mire it down and swamp it in the bureaucratic process.
Thank you. Martin?
So I think the question was if there is or should be a national strategy, right? I would agree with Professor Kaplan that the best strategy is freedom. I don't think there was any strategy by the Czech government, and I mean, I always thought that the Czech Republic was not a usual, target country for people to emigrate to, because we speak a language that few people understand. We are not famously rich like the US, the UK, or Germany. Although I think it's a good country. It's a very safe country, and Czech people, even though they're very grumpy, are actually kind of nice. And so
I think that's basically the definition of Central European people.
maybe. And so I was a bit upset that the refugees from the previous crises never seemed even to entertain the possibility of coming to the Czech Republic, although to a lot of happiness for the anti-immigration crowd. But now Ukrainians, even before this war, were, after the Slovaks, the largest minority in the Czech Republic, and Slovaks, that doesn't really count, we're the same people basically. And so of course a lot of them are coming to the Czech Republic, and I have to commend the government that whatever hurdles there used to be for the immigration, they suspended them, or they don't at least yet try to enforce them. And so the Ukrainians are getting visa, work permits easily. There are no hurdles that I know of against them getting housing, except for the natural hurdles that there isn't enough housing for the supply is not unlimited. And so my wish would be that the government actually, and possibly other governments as well, realize that some of the regulations are not needed even during peace, much like what we learned during the pandemic. There were rules that get suspended and nobody missed them. So maybe let's not reintroduce these hurdles going forward.
Oh my God, I'm surrounded with liberal economists. Let me quote another liberal economist. It's Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He has a story in his Black Swan book, which I think all of us read. When he had a junior job back in 70s or 80s or 90s, whatever, his task was to go to JFK in New York and look for badly dressed people on the incoming Moscow flight, because those are the scientists. And he had to pick up those guys because their superior knowledge in mathematics could be used in the I don't know, some kind of bank he was working back then. If I understand you correctly, you think that spontaneous reactions are taking care for most of the crisis happening now on the Ukrainian border. And I think that at some point, also spontaneously, some current young junior position people will be sent to the border to pick up the scientists and take them to their respective companies. So am I right to understand that your point is this should happen on company and business level, and there should be no governmental strategy for this kind of cherry picking of immigrants? Because if I understand correctly, this is basically what you said, that the government should not be actively searching for those people, should not be actively try to attract these kind of people. So no state-backed brain drain should be in place, but this has to happen spontaneously. Is it the point we had made, or are there some differing opinions?
They say, of course, if you want to avoid a brain drain, you could have good policies so smart people don't want to leave your country. That's always a good start. But given those policies that already exist, it does bring us back to the basic question of international trade, which is, well, is it good to buy things or good to sell things? Right, well, which one is it? I mean, the correct answer, of course, is both, and yet policymakers usually base it on the idea of it's very good to export things and very bad to import things. And the migration equivalent of that is it's bad to lose, so it is bad when you lose people, but then it is possibly also bad to gain people if they are. I think probably the best way of describing the usual view is that you want to keep your high-skilled people and you want to get other countries' high-skilled people. And on the other hand, good for you to lose your low-skilled people, and also good for you if you don't get low-skilled people from other countries. I think this is probably what is guiding at least many countries, especially countries that have skill-based migration. And I say, this really is as misguided as the idea that the goal of international trade is just to sell things without buying things. High-skilled workers, when they go to other countries, there's a reason they're doing it. They're going there because they have a higher productivity in the other country. They produce more value for the world. Often they also produce more value for their home country because they send home remittances. Even now, it's quite normal for an Indian programmer who moves to the United States to triple his income. Right? Even today, you might think with the internet that we would have totally equalized wages around the world, at least for IT. This is not so. So yes, when Indians move to the United States to work in IT, there is a large gain from that, because you are moving someone from a place where their skills are worth more or worth less to a place where they're worth more. And really, this is the best way of thinking about migration in general. It's a way where you're moving people from places where their skills are worth less to places where their skills are worth more. So I say that when Hungary loses its best educated people to richer countries, that is an example. They are moving from a place where their skills are worth less to where they're worth more. When you get low-skilled workers from other countries, the same good thing is happening. They're moving from a place where their skills are worth less to a place where their skills are worth more. And really, it is sort of a snobbery of thinking that what you want to do is to just keep all of the highly educated people in your country and avoid having less educated people in your country. These are all useful skills. Right? If you work in a firm, you don't want to have everyone be Albert Einstein, because then who takes out the garbage? Albert Einstein takes out the garbage in a firm where everyone's Albert Einstein. That's not a good use of resources. So yeah, I would say, pushing back against Andras, I don't think the country should think about how can we go and at least achieve balance. And even once you accept this idea that balance is good, why do you even want balance? Why don't you just want to get as many high-skilled people as possible and have no low-skilled people? That would seem to be the logical conclusion, and it's one where if you think about it, I think you realize, that sounds good, but it's not really true.
Actually, Brian, I don't recall I was talking about balance or any balance in this respect. Well, I was talking
perhaps I misunderstood.
Yeah, most likely. I was talking about actually that if you look at the loss due to emigration in those countries, exactly along the terms you are referring to in terms of skills, in terms of productivity, and the gains due to migration. The balance, I mean, the equilibrium, it's not the balance or the balance in terms of a cash counting system is negative. And that's the point. And I think a good policy, any policy, I mean, either it's in positive terms, like doing things, or it's in negative terms, like in terms of negative liberties, that just letting things happen. The good policy is that which eventually achieves more gains than losses. I guess we agree on that, aren't we?
Right. I'm just. I mean, are you thinking of?
You talk about the whatever dollar bills on the pavement.
Right.
So that's the thing. The bigger the bill is, the better the well, that's my term for balance, but then better the outcome is. And what my argument here that the countries, Hungary included, but the countries in the region are not doing well in this respect. And so what a policy, a relevant and valid policy consideration should be, I mean, how you can tinker the system or change the present things, be it the legislation, be it social attitudes, be it policies, be it customs, habits, whatever, to improve that situation.
I guess I'm just wondering. So how do you know that the current balance is bad? If you lose a lot of high-skilled workers and gain a lot of low-skilled workers, do we know that's bad or no?
Yeah, it's clearly bad. I mean,
okay, that's exactly what I'm disagreeing with.
All right, okay.
Yes, I'm saying when like high-skilled workers, when they leave, that creates gains. When low-skilled workers come to you, that creates gains. Two gains, not one loss, one gain, two gains.
Well,
add, don't subtract.
Definitely, but I mean, in this idealistic dreaming about what I guess we are here together for, the question is always whether you can realize more gains. And you can see, for instance, just take the Ukrainian people coming into the country.
Let me interrupt for a minute, because I think there is a substantial debate here, which could be characterized like there is the economical argument, which especially if it's liberal economics, is for basically any problems of the free market, the solution is having more free market. And there is gains on different nature, and on the long run we are all dead, but on the long run they will sort themselves out. That's basically the economists' argument for anything, but for migration too. And there's a political argument which I think András is possibly involuntarily but presented to us, in which a country, any country which has a political leadership, like every country does, the political leadership always has an agenda which says we should have like better immigration or better people coming in and worse people going out, and in the long run or even in the short run achieve a situation when we attract, for lack of better expression, good people and we get rid of bad people. And basically every political argument boils down to this very simple concept. Probably from the economical standpoint, the answer is already a big no, but is there any policy you guys think to be a valid or usable concept from the political leadership to place a country in a better position in this competition where companies try to improve their, countries try to improve their performance by like getting quality immigration or anything like this, or this should be entirely be left to the natural market things to happen.
Well, I mean,
if I may to take over. First, there's no contradiction. I mean, if you want the better quality of immigration and you want the better share of this pie, if I may use the metaphor from Brian's book, there's no contradiction. The open borders, the liberalization of the labor market, it's your answer. Even if you do it selectively, it's still a massive improvement. Like, for example, the Polish government stance on the issue is seemingly contradictory. Like, for example, just 3 months ago, we've had the situation on the border with Belarus, in which Polish government put a really hardline stance. We basically have a wall built now between our borders because there were migrants coming from first Afghanistan, the whole Middle East, then also possibly Africa, and they didn't want to let them in. But now, in the current context, the situation reversed completely. First, all the people who come, they're allowed to stay not for 90 days, but for 18 months. Then they can apply for a 3-year period of temporary stay, and then they can legalize. So there is a strong prospect for most of these 2 million people that already came to Poland that they will stay here. Also, the Poland incentivized it even further. No matter the quality of education, the skill, no discrimination in this regard whatsoever. That if you
sorry, you think this is because of some international political reason, or the Polish government did just realize that, hey, we are the Silicon Valley for Belarus?
I mean, we as the participants of the general economy, we are all what economists call utility maximizers. But for us, the way to maximize our utility is usually to provide some meaningful and valuable service to the community. And for the politicians, it's a bit a different story. They have to keep the being re-elected prospect in their mind. And I believe that this grassroots support for the case of Ukraine, and also the cultural ties and all this, played such an important factor that the government had no other way than to take a stance on the right side of history, if I may use this as well, and liberalize and basically introduce all the points in a playbook that we've been arguing in the past. Sadly, now it's only limited to the citizens of the Ukraine, but we can only imagine how bigger improvement it would be if it were being applied the same way universally, like, for example, during this past crisis. And there's one more important factor. Like, we already know in Poland, for example, that our economy needs 500,000 of workers right now, and possibly at least a few times that until the end of the decade. And what did the government do in the past? If we call about some migration strategy, they did nothing. And not because they didn't know, because there are dozens of NGOs who are, and private companies obviously as well, who are putting forward this problem with shortage of labor, and not only in highly educated, high-skill job markets. Many of this, a bigger part actually, is in manufacturing job, in agriculture, in low-end services. Mm-hmm. So there is a massive gain to be had from this migration, and it will work both ways. Now it's only for the people with the Ukrainian citizenship, so it's not even.
But it might be like an event that opened the gates.
Yeah.
Martin?
I think you asked if there is, in our eyes, any role for the government
Mm-hmm.
in all of this, and I think that, of course, yes, but and there are many examples where the government either has the sole power to do something or a very, a big advantage. So, for example, it's much easier for the government to send a train to the Ukrainian border and come back with many refugees than it is for us, right? We don't even have we don't even know how to drive a train. So we go by car. We send cars, and piece by piece we bring the refugees, and it's of course easier for the government to do it with a train. Or, as Professor Kaplan suggested, only the government can say to the Russian soldiers, if you desert, we'll give you citizenship and you'll be protected by us from the Russian government. We cannot do that. We cannot offer them citizenship. Or the government can say, or could say, we won't give subsidies to the farmers this year, we'll give donations to the refugees or something to that effect. So of course the government could do these things, and that I would support. I don't know about the other guys here, but of course the government can do stuff.
Right. Let's see. Oh yes. In terms of things government can do to improve the outcomes, I mean, the most obvious one of all is to say that migrants are allowed to work. I mean, it is crazy when people complain about migrants not working in countries where it is illegal to work. It's like, do you want them to work illegally, or what is the plan exactly? So this is the first and most obvious thing. And then secondly, as I was suggesting in my talk, if you are concerned about migrants that are coming to abuse the welfare state, then it makes sense to say we are going to have different rules for migrants than natives for the welfare state. I know that for EU members you have these rules saying the non-discrimination, but these rules don't apply when you're letting in people from outside of the EU, so it would still be open to you, as far as I understand, I'm not an EU lawyer, to say that if you're coming in from other parts, then we are going to limit your access to benefits so that you will not be a burden on us and will be a contributing member. So that is, again, a very obvious thing. If you are known as Sweden, where you can be supported by taxpayers for years, then you're probably going to get people that are less interested in working. On the other hand, if you are known as, say, Singapore, where the whole point of coming there is to work, then I think you're going to get people that are more motivated to work. Although it is selection, but it is also just changing incentives. Often one and the same person in one environment will work and another environment will not.
Okay, but that leads to another question. I happen to be an EU lawyer, or part of my practice.
So is my law correct?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, good. All right.
But for example, the United States of America seems to be like legally to be more comfortable with people arriving from overseas and trying to work there, because the U.S. legal system is built like there's like the green card people, there are the undocumented people, and all sorts of people with legal status, which is not a full citizenship, but they are allowed to work and live there. However, the EU has, and most especially those countries who have the continental legal system, in which there is just a single citizenship, everyone is equal. There's no like green card people. There's no undocumented but working, but they have a social security number kind of immigrants. This might lead to the next topic, which is that some countries seem to be more suited to this, like having a mass immigration or having their labor market adapted to immigration. EU seems to be less adapted to this, and it causes problems. It causes cultural problems, like clashes between like people of having like different religious background, like different social standards. We have like these stories from Germany, like wives locked up because their husband doesn't allow them out of the house, and then the politicians obviously riding on this because it's a good counter-immigration argument. Do you think that these problems should be addressed by the government? Should some people should there be standards for immigration that like I will allow everyone in who subscribes for our values, our religion, our like constitution, or is it another thing which will sort out itself in the long run?
Yeah, I think. See, I guess I actually was talking about this in my talk. So it's true that when you take an adult from a very different culture, they do not suddenly transform as soon as their foot touches the ground. That doesn't mean they can't be a productive member of society. Work is something that people around the world understand. It really is possible for someone to show up from Afghanistan, not speak any European language, and just work in the back of a restaurant and take care of themselves and be a self-supporting member of society. Also, we do see that children of someone like that, when they grow up in that society, they do assimilate to a very high level. I would say, yeah, that is a good example of things working themselves out in the long run. When people think about the United States as being very different from Europe, I actually don't think so. Right? Actually, I think many Americans would be shocked by just how multicultural Europe is, as Americans would be very puzzled by the idea of people speaking many different languages natively, all being together at a conference. This would be very unusual in the United States. People would be like, well, what do you mean we have people who speak Polish and French and German as the first language, and then what do? They all speak English together at a conference? That would be quite shocking to most Americans. When I talk to my dad about how this works, he's always puzzled. He says, what do you mean? What you just go there and speak English to them, and all over the world, all over Europe, and they understand? Like, yeah. You're like, well, how does that happen? Well, people, especially if your language is not spoken by many people, you actually learn another language, and you don't want to just talk to other people in your own country. Like, well, why do they want to talk to people in other countries? Like, well, maybe they think there's some useful ideas that are not created by people in their own country. Well, why would they think that? So, this is what it is like talking to my dad. But my dad is a very normal American. These attitudes are actually that you may think of as being very backwards and nationalistic are actually very common in the United States. And yet, it's true, we still do take in immigrants from all over the world, and we have a long tradition of that. In a way, when you think about what Europe looks like, you can either think of it as a lot of different countries that are very homogeneous, or you can think of it as one large mega nation that is very heterogeneous. And these are both ways that you can think about the situation. I think actually the second way is a much more fruitful way of thinking about Europe. I mean, often actually I like to think about the European Union is what the Austro-Hungarian Empire could have been. It is a very multi-ethnic place where there is a common language, which is now English instead of German, like it would have been in the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. But still, it is very doable. I think you really have it within yourselves to do it. I mean, and honestly, when I talk to Americans, I talk about open borders in the EU. I talk about how it is possible for people, members of dozens of countries, to freely move and work with each other, which if you had told people in 1945 this would happen, they would have laughed in your face. Ha ha. A grim laugh, a dark laugh of how absurd this is. You think after 2 world wars, we're just going to let people from all over Europe work in each other's countries? I think it really does show how much potential Europe had that was unrevealed. You had to wait and see. So like when you say this is not suited for us, so try it. You will be surprised. I think what's happening in Poland, if you would describe this even to Poles a year ago, they just said, impossible, not doable, beyond all feasibility. It's or maybe it can be done. The line from Empire Strikes Back. Always with this one, it cannot be done, right? Why don't you try it and see? This is what I always tell my kids when they give up at the first sign of trouble. It's always hard the first time you try, but try harder. Try in many different ways. Don't just say that it can't be done. How do you think anybody does it? Because they didn't give up as soon as they had the first difficulty. So that's my view.
Do it or do it not.
Like Master Yoda says.
Can do.
But we are people from countries where we hear that we don't want people of certain nationality, color, religion, country of origin here in our countries.
Americans say all of that except color. Color's the one thing you don't say in America.
Well, we don't exactly say it here, but
See, you don't say it either. You're the same as us.
But we also have a bunch of code words for that, like the US has. But all of our governments, the Czech, the Polish, and the Hungarian, says that it will cause problems because people of certain origin will come here and will come here in mass, and then they will have trouble. They will make trouble here. What are your opinion on these? Should governments stop saying that, or saying that for a certain level, or how is it done?
Well, I think they definitely are pushing it a little bit beyond beyond the limits. So this is definitely not my taste, and it's also not only a taste issue. I think it's about something else. So at least my understanding of this very explicit upfront anti-immigration, and especially anti-immigration discourse in these sort of ethnicist or racist framework is as much more to do with short-term, getting short-term political gains and sort of securing and expanding political constituencies, than sort of far-sighted considerations on immigration policies, and we definitely see this double talk here in Hungary. So there's much talk about unwanted immigrants, the migrants, what Boldizsár referred to. That there is a very well constructed persona, let's put it that way, which has not much to do with actual immigrants in a country, and you already see that. That kind of mental gymnastics through which people try to sort of get rid of that discrepancy and try to accommodate themselves in an everyday world in which actually the immigration numbers are on the rise. The labor market, especially the migrant labor market, is expanding. So there is immigration which is not labeled as immigration. So we talk about expats, we talk about foreign students, we talk about our colleagues, we talk about X, Y, Z in personal terms. So you see that. But like the question you started with, and whether there are differences in migration system, this is what fascinates me more. And what I see here is that there are fundamentally different systems of immigration, and we need to understand that well. And you can draw a spectrum in which you find probably the Gulf countries as one extreme, where it's well, there's a trade-off. When you talk about migration and migration policies, there is always a trade-off between numbers and rights. And so, I mean, the number of people you let in and the rights or social membership or inclusion you offer. And it's a very good game. And what you see on the one extreme is the Gulf countries with no rights, but access to the labor market, and there is a very limited role in society, and you can get probably a Scandinavian welfare state as the other extreme, where everything is about social and community membership, and then all kind of varieties. And what you see here in this, but I mean, let's just forget the region. I think what political entities, governments are tinkering with at the moment is finding again a balance. Sorry to say that, but finding the balance between the two. That you need to serve the constituency, and actually membership, political membership, cultural identity, proximity is something that counts for local communities, counts for people. Europeans spent a good 300 years with killing of each other in order to achieve that homogeneity on the level of nation state, in terms of ethnic cleansings, in terms of compulsory public education, in terms of linguistic politics and everything. Okay. And this is what you right now see, and it's something we shouldn't underestimate when we devise policies on economic terms or on utilitarian terms. Sorry.
So, Sandor, you've asked whether the government should tell all these nasty things that they do here or in Poland. I say yes, because it would be tragic to learn who we are dealing with after we've made some relations or friendship with them. It's good to know what's in their heads. And if we are to look at this from the other perspective, to me it was always very baffling that people are so worried about the impact that the migrants have on the culture, because it basically says much more about the way you yourself think about your culture and how weak must it be to get threatened by these people without any connections, any assets, who are coming here in this threatened state and will what? Overnight dismantle your culture? This just means that you have zero faith in the resilience and the accomplishments of what's supposedly so important to you. And in the past, we've had, in our mutual historical experience, wonderful examples of what's happened when the different cultures met. And it was always almost universally enrichment. Like, for example, when in Poland, during the time of the persecution of the Jewish minorities in the Middle Ages, the Poland basically had this edict of broad religious tolerance, and the Jewish communities migrated into Poland. A very strong culture, very isolated culture, which basically formed pockets within a Polish society, which only led to the enrichment. And to this day, like for example in my hometown of Kraków, if you go to Kazimierz, a UNESCO listed site, you will see enrichment that worked both ways in this regard. And if we are to understand this correctly, I strongly recommend you picking up a book of a guy called Jonathan Haidt. the righteous mind, why are good people getting divided over religion and politics? And Haidt kind of gives us a very intimate look into what is happening to us when we are faced with this problem of migration. Because he makes this wonderful metaphor that our initial reaction to these things that are different, that might be scary, is a relation between an elephant and a rider. But in this situation, it is the elephant which is driving the rider, not the other way around. So we, as the economists, we often try to use like rational arguments. We deal in mathematics. Brian had already pointed out to the futility of this in his earlier talk.
Not quite.
Yeah, but in a situation like this, when the pressure is high, the emotions are strong, we have to learn how to handle the elephant, how to tame the elephant. And I believe that in this particular crisis, it happened because of the three main factors. First, we all share the common presumption that Russia is a big threat, and this was a significant factor. The second one is the proximity of the language, because for us, at least in Poland, Ukrainian language is pretty similar, so it wasn't like these are people from completely outside of the sphere of cultural or other influence. But the third one is that we had already had the chance to meet them. Over 1.5 million Ukrainians were working in Poland temporarily before it all began. And that's why it's so important for the government to allow this, if they are to do anything, to allow these small windows for the migrants from the foreign, more different, more exotic, if I may say so, cultures to enter the country. Because this way, we can tame this elephant.
Getting used to them.
Yeah, getting used to them and taming the elephants. Which is a completely, as Haidt claims it, a completely normal, ordinary reaction, which in the past, in our evolutionary history, was actually beneficial, because a contact with the different group of people back then usually meant conflict. Now it only means enrichment.
Okay, Martin?
I think the basically only legitimate reason to exclude somebody from immigrating is if they're known, if they are known criminals. You have the legitimate right to imprison them, and I think you have the legitimate right not to allow them to enter into your country. And I am in favor of the Ellis Island method of accepting immigrants, where you sort through the people. If they are known criminals, you don't let them in, if I understand that correctly, and you let everybody else in basically freely. And there were famous immigrants who migrated into the United States through Ellis Island. For example, the first Democratic mayor of Chicago from Kladno near Prague, Mr. Cermak, or the actor in 12 Angry Men who portrays the immigrant is actually he used to be even a famous Czechoslovak actor before he migrated, and then he inspired, for example, Sonia Sotomayor on her legal career, George Voskovec. So it's not I don't think it's a system that would threaten the country, and it would enrich the country. For example, the Czech cuisine is terrible, and I welcome all immigrants who want to make the Czech cuisine better, so that we have more foods to choose from.
The Americans make better Budweiser than the Czechs, or is it the other way around? Sorry.
Yeah, to go back to your original question.
American cuisine is better than Czech.
I mean, your original question, aren't there problems with certain kinds of immigrants? And the answer I want to give is, of course there are problems with certain kinds of immigrants. I picture this: someone hands you a baby, and then you're looking at the baby. They say, aren't there problems with this baby? Of course there are problems with this baby. This baby is going to do a whole bunch of things that are bad. But is that a reasonable way to assess the value of the baby, to say he has some problems, there's going to be some issues? That is not a reasonable reaction. The reasonable reaction is, yes, but overall, what's the overall result? Let's not go and say he's going to keep me up one night, or he's going to be sick one day. Say, look, the overall impact of this baby, what is the net effect here of this person here? Is it a good thing this person is here, or a bad thing? Now again, if the baby is baby Hitler, then he says, sorry, baby, this is a bad baby. But Like, how bad does a baby have to get before you would say it's better that this baby had never been born? I think it has to be very bad. And that really is the way that I think about immigration and immigration of groups that people complain about. Look, obviously, if you let no Muslim immigration into your country, you're going to have very little Muslim terrorism. Yes, but what about the vast majority of Muslims that would never be involved in terrorism? What about them? You're going to lose them too. Does it make sense? Once I was actually at a conference where they had a panel of people whose family members had been murdered by illegal immigrants. All right? They really did it. They found a bunch of people who had had family members murdered by illegal immigrants. They put them all up in front of the audience, just like this one, and asked them their opinion about illegal immigration. What would you even say? Say, well, I'm sorry for your loss, but this is a very bad argument for saying you shouldn't let immigrants in. You could just as well have a panel of people whose family members were murdered by Hungarians and say, so we don't want to have Hungarians. It is a rare case, and to try to get people to have this gross overreaction of saying this kind of people shouldn't be here at all because there's something bad on the news that some members of that group did. That is, I think, the thing that we need to work on. And again, I'll admit, it's not easy, right? It requires a lot of intellectual discipline to not have your brain melted by the news. The whole industry of the news is to try to melt people's brains, to turn them into constant, paranoid, miserable people worried about the latest thing they've heard. One thing to do is to not watch the news. I recommend that. But read Wikipedia instead. Read the Wikipedia article, which summarizes what's known rather than the latest thing designed to upset you. But if you are going to keep watching the news, at least watch it knowing that they are trying to make you paranoid. They are not giving you the full picture. They're not giving you anything close to the full picture. How often do you see a news story saying, 10 years ago we tried to terrify you about this problem. It turned out it wasn't a big deal. Sorry. That will never be on the news. And once you realize that's never on the news, you realize, yeah, all news is kind of fake news. It's all fake in the sense that they are giving you a very tiny sliver of what really happens in the world, all geared towards making you paranoid all day, every day.
Okay. Before the questions, I have many friends who are anti-immigration. They know migrants, as they are called in Hungary, but they only know nice migrants. So this, I think, summarizes what propaganda does to people here in Eastern Europe, that no one likes them in general, but knows some. And if you talk about them or with these people, it turns out that basically all the migrants they know are nice migrants, and they never met a non-nice one. But they are still against it, and I think sometime in the future, I hope it will change. But that's just my desires about the future. Questions? We have time for maybe 1, 2.
Thank you very much for the interesting discussion, and it was really interesting to hear about the competitiveness of a country in relation to immigration. And my question is actually for the fellow Central Eastern European panelists. So as Martin also mentioned, we are not countries that are typically the targets of immigration. So despite what our governments might say, we have had pretty much no refugees in our countries in the past years until Ukraine happened. And even other types of immigration, while much higher than the governments often communicate, are actually much lower than in Western Europe. So we have not been dealing with this situation. In a way, we are a blank slate. At the same time, we are also sort of the poor cousins in the EU. So competitiveness is very much on the agenda. And in fact, we compete with each other often. So the Czech Republic, Poland, and Hungary are each other's competition in many respects in terms of the economy. So my question is to the three of you, whether any of you have seen any recognition of this fact on your government side, any type of communication or measures when you saw that possibly a politician or a government official said, guys, this is an opportunity. Let's put ourselves at the forefront of this competition and make an advantage out of the situation. Has anything positive like this happened?
So
If I may start, I believe what Poland does is an example of this because for the past few years we've been aware of this problem that there is a large shortage of labor in our market. Polish government didn't want to do anything about it, but the German one did. Like between 2013 and 2018, approximately 13% of Polish GDP was produced by migrants from Ukraine, so a large amount. And we were very worried that with Germany planning to open their labor market, we will lose the workers from the Ukraine. And Germany prepared like a large-scale campaign, information campaign, wanted to open the borders completely. This didn't manifest, luckily for our economy. So now the measures that are in place, I believe they are kind of very hastened, try to reduce this and even maybe outdo this lack of action before. Because as I mentioned before, it's not 90 days in Poland, it's 18 months. Then you can apply for a 3-year temporary stay, and then you have a fast track to acquiring either permanent residency or even citizenship is planned. So we expect actually in Poland not 2 million persons cross today. We expect between 3 to 5 million people just in Poland, and honestly we expect most of them to actually stay.
I haven't heard any politicians saying that this is an opportunity. I heard the union, the boss of the Czech unions, who is a horrible person, say again a horrible thing, that accepting more Ukrainian migrants will hurt Czech employers and their wages, and so there are comments like this, of course, and the general attitude so far is that we are welcoming, but I don't think anybody has presented it as a positive opportunity to actually enrich ourselves. But possibly there may have been some comments like this apart from me, but I haven't heard them.
Yeah. Well, I think this is the issue I started off with, that the situation is pretty grim, at least from the Hungarian perspective, because the problem is realized. So though I mean there hasn't been a big government campaign targeting Hungarian nationals, but there's been a big effort actually attracting people from abroad. The government is establishing, but I mean you guys, especially those of you who are from immigration law, you must be aware of that temporary job agencies, recruitment companies are pretty active with government support to attract people. But then the problem comes what I just mentioned in the beginning, that the competition is not only between countries of the region and Western European countries. There is competition for labor force for sure, but also there is a competition between each other, and that's the problem here. What you just said about the Polish schemes, Hungary has introduced schemes targeting mostly Ukrainian and Serbian labor force, less attractive than that, plus the cultural proximity is less obvious. So the result is definitely a gain for Poland and not so big a gain for Hungary, though I mean Hungary still benefits from Ukrainian labor force. We experienced something similar in the 90s, in the early mid-90s, where actually Hungary had an advantage in the region by the pool of ethnic Hungarians in the remaining country. So it was a great benefit for the country that people moved over into Hungary. They established, I mean, settled here. They started to work, and I mean, looking at the demographic and statistical composition, that was clearly a gain and clearly something that probably every politician dreams of. And then it sort of melted away by the early 2000s. So it was no longer a valid pool. Even a secondary type of migration started, where actually elderly relatives, dependents started to move over, and again, like from a pure economic point of view, this was not as productive as the first wave of immigrants. But right now, what Hungary can and should do, and actually is doing, is trying to reach out to further away countries. But then the obstacle is the already established political communication. So it will clearly interfere with that, recruiting people from Pakistan, from India, from Central Asian countries. Plus, then interestingly, the competition is no longer with countries in the region, but countries in Western Europe. So traveling 1,500 miles to work in Europe and traveling another 200 miles to neighboring countries, that's clearly an advantage for those who enter the country. And we already see that, and I guess you guys, especially in your business, you see that too, that you recruit people, you get all the papers done, you get the residence permit done, and then the guy is in Portugal or Spain or wherever the next day or probably the week after. So this is something that's going on. Even I've seen recruitment advertisements in Pakistan advertising that residence permit in Europe, come to work to Hungary, and then you have free movement in the Schengen zone, which is clearly not about feeling the Hungarian labor market.
That supports Professor Kaplan's
Very
argument that for them there's
Exactly,
no such thing as
exactly.
Hungary.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
Europe.
Yeah, that's the thing. But for Hungary, it's still something that counts as a national economy. So that's the game here.
If there is no more questions, I think from my vantage point here, I can see that the sandwiches are already in. So this is now over, and I think there's a lunch break now. Thank you for your attention.